You choose foods labeled natural because you believe you're making a safer choice. You see that word and assume the food is simple, lightly processed, and closer to how it should be without having to overthink it. The problem is that, in the UK, foods can still be heavily processed, altered, and legally carry the word natural. Because of this, natural has stopped being a guarantee and become a marketing tool. It's used to make processed foods look simpler than they are, to disguise what's really gone into them, and to lower your guard while you shop. In this video, we're exposing how the word natural is actually used on UK food packaging and why many products carrying it are nothing like what most people imagine. By the end of this, you'll understand why this single word has become one of the most misleading in the supermarket and why trusting it is a mistake. Natural doesn't mean what you think. Most people see the word natural on food and assume it means the product is simple, lightly processed, and close to how it would be made at home. It creates an image of honest ingredients and minimal interference, and for many shoppers, that single word is enough to build trust before they even turn the packet over. The problem is that in the UK, natural does not have a strict legal definition when it comes to food labels. There is no rule that forces a company to prove that a product is minimally processed, freshly made, or close to its original form before using that word. As long as certain basic conditions are met, brands are free to apply it in ways most shoppers would never expect. That's why you see natural on foods that have clearly been altered, processed, or engineered for long shelf life. Products like so-called natural yogurts that contain thickeners or stabilizers, natural breakfast cereals that are baked, refined, and recombined, or natural ready-made sauces that have been heat-treated and preserved for months. The word stays on the front of the pack, even when the food itself is far removed from anything people would recognize as natural. Because there is no clear boundary, shoppers end up filling in the meaning themselves. They assume the word guarantees quality, care, and restraint, when in reality it guarantees none of those things. Brands know this. They rely on the fact that most people are busy, tired, and shopping on habit. A reassuring word on the front of the packet often stops any further questions. This is the payoff most people don't realize. Once natural loses its meaning, it becomes a tool. It allows processed foods to appear safer than they are, encourages people to pay more without getting better quality, and quietly lowers scrutiny. You're not being informed, you're being reassured. And once you understand that, you start to see why this label appears so often on foods that don't taste right, don't digest well, or don't resemble real food anymore. The word is doing the work, not the ingredients. What makes this even more concerning is that the deception doesn't stop at the word natural itself. Many products go a step further, using a phrase that sounds even more convincing and far less suspicious. A phrase most shoppers never question, even though it hides some of the heaviest processing of all. Natural flavorings are often factory-made. Most people feel reassured when they see natural flavorings on a food label. It sounds harmless and familiar, and it gives the impression that the taste comes directly from real ingredients like fruit, herbs, or spices. Because of that, many shoppers never question it, especially when it appears on foods already marketed as natural. In reality, natural flavorings is one of the loosest terms allowed on UK food labels. While the original source of the flavor must come from something natural at some point, the process used to create it can involve heating, extraction, concentration, fermentation, and recombination in industrial facilities. By the time the flavor is added back into the food, it often has very little in common with the ingredient people imagine. You can see this clearly in everyday products. For example, Tesco own brand flavoured yogurts and Sainsbury's yogurt ranges often list natural flavourings instead of real fruit in meaningful amounts. The strawberry or vanilla taste doesn't come from the fruit itself, but from flavour compounds added after processing. Similarly, popular breakfast cereals and cereal bars marketed as wholesome or lightly sweetened frequently rely on natural flavourings to restore taste lost during refining and baking. Drinks are another major example. Flavored waters and juices from brands like Volvic and Innocent often contain natural flavorings alongside fruit juice or concentrates. The flavor is adjusted and boosted to ensure consistency across batches, shelf life, and transport, not to reflect the original ingredient. What you're tasting is a controlled reconstruction, not fresh flavor. The reason this happens is simple. Processing removes flavor. Heating, drying, and long storage strip food of its natural taste, so manufacturers add it back in afterwards. Natural flavorings exist to make heavily processed food taste acceptable again. The label doesn't explain this. It reassures instead. For some people, this is more than just a taste issue. Many report that foods containing flavorings, even natural ones, don't sit well with them. Headaches, bloating, or a general sense of discomfort are common complaints. The ingredient list looks clean, but the body reacts differently. Once you realize how often flavor has to be rebuilt, it raises a bigger question. If the taste of a food has to be manufactured and added back in, how natural is the food itself? And flavor is only one part of the story, because in many products, the entire structure of the food has been altered, preserved, and reshaped long before it reaches the shelf. That leads directly to the next issue, where foods aren't just flavored after processing, they are fundamentally processed from start to finish, while still being sold under labels that suggest simplicity. Highly processed food can still be called natural. Many people believe that if a food is highly processed, it wouldn't be allowed to carry the word natural. Processing, in most people's minds, means factory-made, artificial, or far removed from real food. So when they see natural on the front of a packet, they assume the product must have avoided that kind of treatment. In the UK, that assumption doesn't hold up. Foods can be baked, refined, heated, blended, dried, preserved, and reassembled, and still legally be described as natural. The label does not require the food to be close to its original state, only that certain conditions are met along the way. How far the product has traveled from its raw ingredients is not something the label has to explain. You can see this clearly with natural ready meals and cooking sauces sold in major supermarkets. Products like Tesco naturally cooking sauces or Sainsbury's own brand ranges, marketed as natural or simple, are often heavily processed to survive long shelf life and transport. These foods are cooked at high temperatures, stabilized and sealed so they can sit on shelves for months, yet the front of the pack still suggests something fresh and lightly handled. Another common example is natural snack foods and cereal bars, including ranges sold at Holland & Barrett and mainstream supermarkets. Many of these products are made by breaking ingredients down into flours, syrups, and pastes, then pressing or baking them back together. The final product may contain recognizable ingredients, but the structure of the food is entirely manufactured. Despite this, the word natural is often used to soften how industrial the process really is. Shelf life is the quiet clue most people overlook. Real. Minimally processed food doesn't last for months without changing. When a product labeled natural can sit unopened for a year, something has been done to it. Preservation, processing, and stabilization are required, but the label doesn't tell you that story. This matters because processing doesn't just change how food looks, it changes how it behaves in the body. Highly processed foods are often digested differently, absorbed faster, and leave people feeling unsatisfied or unwell, even when the ingredient list looks acceptable. The word natural masks that reality. Once you realize that processing alone doesn't disqualify a product from using this label, you start to question how much information is being left out. And it becomes even more concerning when you look closer and see that some natural foods don't just rely on processing, they also contain added substances most shoppers never expect to find there. That's where the next problem comes in, because even foods that look clean on the surface can still be carrying additives behind the scenes. Additives can still be inside natural foods. Turn over almost any food labeled natural and look closely at the ingredient list. This is where the picture usually changes. On the front, the product feels simple and reassuring. On the back, you often find a list that's longer, more technical, and harder to understand than you expected. That contrast is not accidental. In the UK, foods described as natural are still allowed to contain certain additives, stabilizers, thickeners, and processing aids. These ingredients may be legally approved, but most shoppers don't expect to find them in products they believed were close to real food. The label on the front never explains this. It relies on the assumption that people won't look too closely. You can see this clearly in everyday products. Natural yogurts and dairy alternatives from supermarket-owned brands, including Tesco and Sainsbury's ranges, often contain stabilizers like pectin or gums to control texture and shelf life. Natural soups and sauces, including chilled and ambient products sold as simple or wholesome, frequently include thickeners or acidity regulators to keep them consistent over time. Even some natural snack products, particularly those marketed as healthier options, rely on additives to stop separation, improve mouthfeel, or extend storage. None of these ingredients have to be highlighted on the front of the pack. They sit quietly in small print, using names many people don't recognize. That's why so many shoppers feel confused when foods that look clean don't feel good to eat. The issue isn't always one ingredient, it's the accumulation of things that were never expected to be there in the first place. This is usually the moment people start questioning labels for the first time. If a food needs added substances to hold together, stay smooth, or last longer, it's already far removed from what most people would call natural. The label doesn't lie outright, it simply leaves out the part that matters. Before moving on, if this is the kind of breakdown you find useful, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps more people see this information, and it lets us keep digging into labels that don't add up. What makes this problem bigger is that additives aren't just used in specialist foods. They appear most often in the products people buy out of habit, the ones they don't think to question. And nowhere is that more noticeable than when the word natural is attached to foods sold directly for families and children, where trust matters the most. Foods for children often use this label. If there's one place the word natural carries the most weight, it's on foods made for children. Parents don't just buy with taste in mind, they buy with trust. When a product is aimed at children and carries words like natural, gentle, or made for little ones, most people assume extra care has been taken. That trust is exactly why the label is used so heavily in this category. Walk down any UK supermarket aisle that sells children's food, and you'll see it everywhere. Children's yogurts, snacks, breakfast items, and drinks are often described as natural, even when they've been processed to the point where texture, flavor, and sweetness have all been carefully engineered. The label creates a sense of safety before a parent ever reaches the ingredient list. Take children's yogurt pouches and pots sold by brands like Yo Valley, supermarket-owned brands, and other family-focused ranges. Many are marketed as natural or wholesome, yet contain added flavorings, fruit concentrates, or stabilizers to ensure smooth texture and long shelf life. The food is designed to be uniform, sweet, and easy to consume, not necessarily close to its original ingredients. The same applies to children's snack bars and cereals, including products sold as natural alternatives to sweets. These foods are often made from refined grains, processed fruit ingredients, and added flavorings, pressed into shapes that appeal to children. The natural label softens how manufactured the product really is, especially when paired with bright packaging and reassuring language. Children are more affected by this than adults. Their bodies are smaller, their taste preferences are still developing, and repeated exposure to heavily processed foods can shape what they come to expect from food itself. When products marketed as natural are actually sweetened, softened, and engineered, it quietly trains children to associate normal food with manufactured textures and flavors. This is why many parents notice the same pattern. Foods that look appropriate and safe on the shelf don't always sit well, don't encourage varied tastes, and don't resemble anything made at home. The label reassures, but the food itself tells a different story. Once you start noticing how often natural is used to lower parental concern, another issue becomes impossible to ignore. Many of these products don't just rely on clever wording, they rely on ingredients and processing that happened far from the UK, long before the food ever reached the shelf. And that's where the next problem comes in. Imported foods still use the natural label. When people buy something like a tomato-based food, they usually picture a very simple process. Tomatoes grown on a farm, cooked down, put into a jar or carton, and sent to the supermarket. It feels straightforward. And because tomatoes are a basic ingredient, most people never think twice about how that product was made. But that picture is rarely accurate. In reality, many tomato-based foods sold in the UK go through a long industrial process before they ever reach a shelf. Tomatoes are often grown in large-scale farms overseas, harvested in bulk, and immediately processed to prevent spoilage. They are crushed, heated, and concentrated into thick pastes or purees within hours of picking. This is done not for freshness, but for storage and transport. Once concentrated, tomato paste can be stored for months, sometimes over a year, in large industrial containers. It's shipped across countries, sometimes across continents, before being used as an ingredient in sauces, soups, ready meals, and tinned foods. When it finally reaches a factory supplying UK supermarkets, it's diluted with water, reheated, seasoned, and adjusted for taste and consistency. During this process, much of what people associate with fresh tomatoes is lost. Heat destroys delicate compounds. Long storage changes flavor. Processing strips out natural variation. To make the final product taste the same every time, manufacturers often rely on flavor adjustments and strict formulation. Despite all of this, many of these products are still sold using words like natural on the label. The law does not require brands to explain how long the ingredient was stored, how many times it was heated, or how far it traveled. As long as the original source was a tomato, the final product can still be framed as natural. This is where the misunderstanding happens. Shoppers aren't wrong for trusting these foods. They're filling in the gaps themselves. They imagine a short journey and minimal handling, when in reality the food has been engineered for durability, consistency, and cost efficiency. That doesn't mean these foods are unsafe, but it does mean they are very different from what most people imagine when they see that label. The word natural hides the scale, distance, and processing involved. Once you understand this with something as basic as tomatoes, it becomes much easier to spot the same pattern elsewhere, because tomatoes are just one example. The same thing happens with many everyday foods people buy on autopilot, assuming simplicity where there is none. And that leads to the final example where this label appears on a product almost everyone buys regularly, rarely questions, and trusts more than they should. The natural product. Almost everyone buys weekly. Think about one of the most common items people put in their trolley without hesitation. It's bought week after week, used every day, and rarely questioned. When people see words like natural, traditional, or simply made on it, they feel confident they know exactly what they're getting. That product is bread. Bread feels familiar. It's something people grew up with, something their parents bought, something that feels unchanged. When a loaf is labeled as natural, many shoppers picture a simple process. Flour, water, yeast, salt, mixed together and baked. Nothing complicated, nothing hidden. But the bread sold in most UK supermarkets today is very different from that picture. Modern bread is produced on an industrial scale, using processes designed to be fast, consistent, and profitable. Dough is often mixed at extremely high speeds to shorten production time. This process changes the structure of the bread, making it softer and more uniform, but also very different from slow fermented bread made in the traditional way. To control how the dough behaves, manufacturers rely on enzymes and processing aids that don't always sound alarming, but exist purely to make the product easier to mass produce. In many cases, Bread is not even fully baked where you buy it. Some loaves are partially baked in large factories, frozen, transported long distances, and then finished in store. Others are formulated to stay soft and flexible for days, sometimes over a week, without going stale. That shelf life alone should raise questions because real bread doesn't behave like that. Despite all of this, the word natural is still allowed on packaging. UK labelling rules focus on ingredients, not processes. That means a loaf can go through intensive mechanical mixing, rapid fermentation, freezing, and shelf life manipulation, and still be presented as natural as long as the ingredients themselves are permitted. This creates a quiet contradiction. The label suggests simplicity, while the reality involves speed, control, and industrial intervention. Shoppers are not being lied to directly, but they are being led to imagine something that no longer reflects how the product is made. You can see this across major supermarket bread ranges, including own brand loaves and even some branded products marketed as better choices. The front of the pack often shows fields of wheat, rustic fonts, and reassuring language. The back of the pack tells a different story, but only if you already know what you're looking for. Many people sense this without being able to explain it. They notice that bread doesn't stale the way it used to. It stays soft for too long. It feels uniform slice after slice. It doesn't behave like bread they remember from bakeries or home kitchens, yet the packaging insists nothing has changed. Bread brings everything together because it sits at the center of daily life. It shows how processing, shelf life engineering, long supply chains, and loose labeling rules can all exist behind a word that feels safe. If the word natural can be stretched this far on something as basic as bread, it can be stretched anywhere. That's why this matters. Avoiding foods with this label isn't about panic or perfection. It's about recognizing that a word you were taught to trust has been emptied of its meaning. Once you see that with bread, you start to see it everywhere, and you stop letting one reassuring word make decisions for you. What this really means for you. By now, one thing should be clear. The problem isn't one product, one brand, or one ingredient. It's a word that has been quietly emptied of its meaning. For years, people have trusted the word natural because it sounded like protection. It suggested simplicity, care, and honesty. But as you've seen, that trust is no longer deserved. In the UK, the word can be used even when food has been heavily processed, altered, stored for long periods, or engineered for consistency and shelf life. That doesn't mean you need to panic or overhaul everything you buy. It means you stop letting one reassuring word make decisions for you. Real food doesn't need convincing language. It doesn't rely on vague promises on the front of the pack. It's usually obvious from the ingredients, the shelf life, and how it behaves when you eat it. When something needs the word natural to feel acceptable, that's often a sign to slow down and look closer. The simplest rule is this: don't trust the label, trust what the food actually is. Foods with short ingredient lists, products that don't last forever, and items that behave the way real food should are usually the safest place to start. That's how you regain control, without stress or obsession. If this video helped you see food labels differently, share it with someone you shop for or eat with. Most people are still making choices based on words that no longer mean what they think they mean. And if you want more clear, honest explanations about everyday UK foods, without hype, trends, or being talked down to, make sure to subscribe. This channel exists to help you shop with confidence again.